541, hold position there. Lexstead, hold position there. Everybody hold position on my ramp. Everybody on taxiway, southwest, that's you. Stop.
Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. And my guess is that's how this pilot was feeling after he accidentally shut down an entire airport. Here's what happened.
Skywest 4177, current wind 280 at 29er, gust 42. I'm assuming you can't go with that?
We can go with that, Skywest 4177.
Can depart in that?
Affirmative, we can depart, Skywest 4177.
Skywest 4177, roger. Runway 36 left, taxi via Golf and Charlie. Delta 2886, just want to give you an update. They said, your company in front of you said one of the signs up there heading to your left on that service road is blowing pretty hard with the wind. It may be a FOD issue, so just use caution up there.
I appreciate that. We're looking.
Beyond 4 Romeo Charlie, turn left when able, ground point 9er, good day.
Okay, left, point 9er. Did have to see about 20 knot loss, short final.
20 knot loss, short final, thank you. Attention aircraft for 36 right, short final, 20 knot loss reported by Phenom.
Now, most of you haven't flown to this airport. It's Austin. I've probably flown in and out of there a few hundred times. I used to fly in there about twice a day. This airport, which used to actually be a large military air base, has very long runways and they run north and south. But the winds on this particular day are coming about 90 degrees to the runway.
Current wind 280 at 29er, gust 42. I'm assuming you can't go with that?
And the winds are strong enough to be knocking over signs. I'm not sure if he's talking about the normal taxiway signs that are out there that we use when we're taxiing, but they've created a FOD situation. If you're not familiar with the term FOD, it's foreign object debris. So in real world, essentially what that means is something that's not supposed to be there. If you're on the ramp and there's a screw on the ground, technically FOD. If a sign has blown onto a taxiway, FOD. Anything that's not basically pavement while you're moving is FOD. And the risk of that is if you're taxiing over and let's say a bolt or something is on the ground, if your engine were to suck that bolt up, it would create a real problem. So it's very important to have the deck clear. Sometimes you'll see on military aircraft carriers, for example, they'll do these FOD walks where everybody will walk shoulder to shoulder and they'll check over the entire flight deck where the planes will be landing just to see if there's anything that's on there that could potentially damage the wheels of the aircraft or something that the plane could end up ingesting, which would obviously cause the engine to be a problem. So they do these FOD checks, and we do those as well in the civilian world. But essentially, that's what he means here when he says this.
Maybe a FOD issue, so just use caution up there.
The other thing that's really important here that I would be thinking of if I was a pilot, because you can hear everybody starting to taxi out and taxi towards the runway, is you heard that Phenom, that plane that came in and landed, they had a 20 knot loss when they were coming in to land.
Did have to see about 20 knot loss, short final.
When you have low level wind shear, essentially it puts your plane at risk of getting away from the ground. Now, there are things that we do to mitigate that. If there is low level wind shear reported, we don't do a reduced thrust takeoff. Most of the times when your plane takes off, even though it feels like it's a lot, we're usually doing a percentage of the full capacity of the aircraft. However, in a situation where you have low level wind shear, you're going to do the absolute max power you can use to get away from the ground. So just in case the wind were to shift from to coming behind you, where it reduces your ability to climb away over a certain section of distance, without getting technical, basically it reduces your ability to get away from the ground while moving forward, if you want to think of it like that. And there is other risks that you have with wind shear, but when you have a wind shear event or low level wind shear, you want to be able to get away from the ground as quickly as possible. So when I hear something like this,
Did have to see about 20 knot loss, short final.
I start stacking it in my brain as something like, okay, so we got a very strong crosswind situation, we got potential low-level wind shear, and I start stacking these things up in my brain as risk-reward. What is it going to be the risk? What can we do to mitigate it? And then, is it worth it to go? And I do that for every flight, but this, you're starting to hear multiple things stacking up and starts to increase the risk factor in my brain and maybe some other pilots' brains. You heard the SkyWest guys are comfortable going with that?
Affirmative, we can depart, Skywest 4177.
I'm assuming the Delta guys are comfortable going with that as well. But at the end of the day, I have to be comfortable with me going based off of not what the plane can do, but what is my skill level? What can I handle? Because these planes have what is known as a max demonstrated crosswind, but it's not typically a limitation. A maximum demonstrated crosswind is different for every aircraft, but it can be anywhere from 15 to 40 knots. And that means the manufacturer of this aircraft was able to safely get the plane to land at that crosswind on any given day. But it's important to know that in most of the airlines that I've ever flown on, they don't give it as a limitation. They do for things like the auto land, but they don't for things like max demonstrated crosswind. It is different from you cannot do more than 25 knot crosswind. So for example, you might have a limitation where your autopilot is only allowed to land with a 25 direct crosswind component. It is not allowed to do 26 knots. If it's 26 knots, you're breaking the rules by doing it. However, if it says plane has a max demonstrated crosswind landing of 25 and it's 26, it doesn't say you, super amazing pilot that you are, cannot land in that, which means it comes down to judgment, which is a little bit risky because you'll have people where they start going, oh, I've done 20, I can do 26. And when they start pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone, which you have to do sometimes in life, that's part of life, but you can start putting yourself into a situation where you're adding more risk than is really necessary. So let's say you're a new pilot on the 747, the winds are gusting 50 knots from the side and you're coming into land. So even though your plane has no limitation requiring you to not land in this very strong crosswind here, a pilot has to make that decision of knowing this is my limit. Sometimes you want to press yourself, and I've done it before, press yourself, especially when you got extra fuel. You can test and see, like, am I comfortable? Can I make this work, especially on a gusty day? So you got to test yourself, but also know, hey, this is just outside the realm of my comfort. There were times where I was flying, especially as an FO, there was times where I was flying and going, man, this is outside the realm of anything that I've seen before. And so I didn't want to take the leg. And there have been times where I've had guys say the same thing to me, like, I don't want this leg. This is a little too sporty. So you have to make that very strong judgment for yourself and not let ego be involved at all when you're evaluating the situation of what is my skill set? What can I comfortably, safely handle? And then what is the environment? And then what are my options? Like at the end of the day, if it's gusting 40 and every other airport around you is completely sucked in and you're the captain and you've never landed anything in more than 15 knots, it's either run out of fuel or land in 40 knots. Like those are your two options. Well, obviously landing 40 knots, better than running out of fuel. No snacks for people who run out of fuel. So watch what happens with these guys when they take off.
Ground, good afternoon. Leader 300, signature Alpha ready for taxi.
Leader 300, Austin ground. Current wind 260 at 24, gust 42. Can you depart with that?
Yeah, we do. Leader 300.
Leader 300, Roger. What ramp did you say?
Oh, we're at Signature Aviation.
Leader 300, Roger. To be Lima and Bravo. 36 right.
So Leader 300, runway 36 right.
Leader 300 tower.
Leader 300's up on tower, Leader.
Leader 300, can you make the left turn on Mike?
Yeah, we can make a left on Mike, Leader 300.
Leader 300, taxi via Mike, hold short, runway 36 right.
Mike, hold short of 36 right, Leader 300.
Wind 260 at 29, gust 42. Leader 300, runway 36 right at Mike, line up and wait.
36 right at Mike, line up and wait, Leader 300.
You may notice the amount of times that you're hearing air traffic control read out these winds. They're reading them out to everyone, which is why I typically am annoyed when people ask for a wind check. Mostly because when I was in flight school, I wanted to do that. I wanted to get the wind check. And my instructors would always say, if the wind is coming from the left or if it's coming from the right, is that going to change how you're going to handle to get the plane down on the middle of the runway, which I was never really able to do very well. But they were right. The reality is that if the wind is shifting left to right and all over the place, it doesn't really matter except if you think you're exceeding a limitation. So let's say your max tailwind landing is 10 knots. And as you were coming in and you got the weather, it was showing an 8-knot tailwind. And you obviously don't want to break the rules of your airline. And so you would just verify, hey, just want to confirm winds are this or what are the winds, just to make sure you're not beating an exceedance, which would then be a problem. If you ended up landing, exceeding that thing and then creating a problem, then your airline would be very upset with you. But That excluded, the reality is that when you're coming into land, if it's very windy like it is right now, they are going to be reading off the winds every few seconds because they want to be protected, the controllers do, as far as for if you do mess something up as a pilot, there is no doubt that you had the current winds and you made that decision as a pilot to go. They want to cover themselves, one, and two, they want to be helpful to you. They want you to know, hey, these are the winds, gusting 42, direct 90, you're good to go with that? Okay, cool, we're good to go with that because they're not in control. They don't work at your airline. They may not even be pilots. They may not even know, hey, that's a lot or that's a little. For some people, 40, direct 40 crosswind is a lot. For some people, 15 is a lot. I don't know, in flight school, 10 felt like a million to me. So it's all relative based off your experience, but you hear how much these controllers are talking about the wind. That's usually why I don't ask for a wind check. When I'm coming into land, if the winds are really bad, they'll typically say something to you. If the winds are 5 knots or 7 knots or 10, they're not going to say anything. So what does it really matter? Just keep your plane going down the middle of the runway, land in the middle of the runway, and do whatever it takes to make your plane do that, which I hated when instructors would say that to me. So I think it's kind of funny that I'm saying that, but that's just the reality of the situation. Now, this jet that we're talking about here is a Challenger 300, which is a $10 million jet, and it's typically not a jet that someone would start off their career in. Obviously, the last couple of years, things have been a little bit crazy, so maybe today you're getting people that are having the opportunity to fly that jet that they wouldn't have 5-7 years ago. I never had an opportunity to fly that jet. It's possible because they have very expensive carpet, and my peanut butter and jelly stains would be leaving jelly stains all over the floor, and that carpet is really expensive. I have dropped a bunch of stains on the 747 and I'm able to wipe it up and you can't tell the difference, but on these nicer jets, everything, literally everything is super expensive, including the carpet. They use some special lightweight something carpet that is really nice. So I never had the opportunity to fly one of these jets, but they are very nice and they typically have more experienced pilots than, let's say, a much smaller aircraft because you start to kind of build your way up as you go. Eventually, it doesn't really matter if you have a bunch of time in a very big or very small jet because it really comes down to decision making like, hey, it's gusting 42 directly from the side. Am I comfortable with that? Yes or no? But this Challenger gets told to line up and wait, which means they're going to fire them off here in just a minute.
Leader 300, runway 36 right at Mike, line up and wait.
And the pilot, you can hear him on the radio, and I always listen for this. I listen to this while I'm flying. I listen to air traffic control, how they talk, what's their cadence like, what's the pitch in their voice, do they sound anxious, do they sound calm? And I also listen to that for pilots as well. When I'm listening to pilots that are flying around me, especially when I start to get close to an airport, if I hear somebody that sounds anxious on the radio, I start to pay more attention who they are and where are they in relation to me, or if they're messing up radio calls, where are they in relation to me, because I want to pay extra attention to that. This guy sounds very calm and competent. Now, I've never flown this plane, but my guess would be based off the way it looks, and I don't know what their limitations are or how it normally handles in a crosswind, but just from my experience, 40 knot crosswind takeoff, even though I've never flown it, I'd probably feel comfortable with it. That being said, if it were a landing, also probably, because you probably have a decent amount of bank with the way the engine and everything are set up on there. On a 7.4, if it was my first week of flying it and you said, oh, we got this 40 knot crosswind and I had never done that before and you had never done that before, I would say like, you'd be better to watch somebody else do that before you try that. And there are other planes that I would not feel comfortable with that, like an Airbus. That's not a plane that I feel comfortable with, mostly just because of the way the joystick is. I don't know how much input in or out. I would have a harder time with something like this. I've flown the same manufacturer of this plane, this Challenger 300. I've flown a similar version of that back in the day. So I would be able to feel comfortable taking something and pushing my limits on it because of the controls and kind of what I think I could probably handle. However, things don't go very well for this guy. Watch this.
Leader 300, wind 260 at 26, gust 42. Fly heading 040, runway 36 right, clear for takeoff.
Heading 040, 36 right, clear for takeoff, leader 300.
Southwest 682, Austin Tower, wind 260 at 27, gust 42, runway 36 left, line up and wait.
Line up and wait, 36 left, Southwest 682.
Hey, ground Delta 541, we're going to stop.
Delta 541, hold position there. Lexjet, hold position there. Everybody hold position on my ramp. Everybody on taxiway. Southwest, that's you. Stop.
Leader 300, stop on the runway.
Southwest 682, hold short, 36 left, with Babel.
We are just slightly over the line, Southwest 682.
Southwest 682, roger. Just hold position.
Holding position, Southwest 682.
It must be nice to have things start to go wrong and then be able to just kind of hit this button and stop, which is what happens in the sim, and essentially what this controller is doing. And my point of saying that is, these things are starting to go wrong for this controller at the airport. And so he's able to just tell everybody, stop moving, so they can really focus on the problem. And the reason I say that is because when you're flying a jet or a plane of any kind and things start to go wrong on your plane, you still have to fly your plane while focusing on the problem and not getting overly focused on the problem, because then you could end up doing something like flying your plane into a mountain, which people have done. So it's just kind of interesting, because if I was a controller, I would 100% do exactly what this guy's doing, which is everybody stop moving so I can focus and get the airport fire and rescue and all those people out there. He's doing everything absolutely right. I'm thinking of it from the perspective of a pilot, like, man, that'd be great. Like, if I had this big problem, I could just be like, all right, let's hit the pause button and let's go ahead and focus on this problem, and then we'll come back and talk about the whole flying of the aircraft. I don't know. I just think it's kind of interesting. Now, you heard this Delta pilot here make this call out saying they were going to stop.
Hey, ground Delta 541, we're going to stop.
I'm guessing that's because they saw how that plane was moving around on the runway, and they wanted to just reduce all risk or motion of them being and creating any type of potential chaos. They didn't know what that plane was going to do, where they were going to go, and so they wanted to not be a moving target, where if they're stopped there on the taxiway, the plane, let's say it departed onto the grass and started coming at them, they'd be able to see that plane's not moving, so they could try to stay away from it. I'm guessing is what they're doing. Really courteous, honestly, and a very professional move, because they're basically reducing risk factors for this other pilot. So, classy. Southwest, however, is on the other side of the airport, so they can't see this. They have no idea, and from personal experience of flying from both, you would have no way to know what was going on the other side. However, when you're at an airport and you're moving around, taxiing, or getting ready for takeoff or whatever, and you hear a controller tell everybody to stop, you know something big has happened. And in all my years, I've never actually been at a major airport where I heard something like that. I've heard it at smaller airports. I've seen some stuff like that in some places that I've been, which I'm not allowed to say why, but anyway, I haven't heard it at a major airport like this, because you start shutting down a major airport, it's a big deal. And the thing is that's interesting here is you can see on this photo that somebody had uploaded onto the internet just how out of control this plane was actually looking. So you can imagine from the perspective of the Delta pilot, they're seeing this is definitely going to be a problem. Now, doing a crosswind landing when you're coming in with gust factor is definitely a challenge. There is some challenges to that. I struggled with it in flight school, even though my flight instructor made me go up and do the max demonstrated crosswind in a plane that I was going on, and no other flight instructors were going out. I was the only plane that was up there, and we actually had a flight instructor that, because all the other planes were grounded and it was like a rainy windstorm, wanted to get into the plane to see, like, what is this like? And my instructor made me go up, and she made me do these landings because she was a great pilot and she wanted to challenge my ability and make me learn how to fly a plane in a strong crosswind. And even though the winds could have been running down the middle of the runway, she was like, no, we want to do takeoff and landings on this exact 90-degree crosswind. And I was like, great, this is super. But that's when you really want to challenge yourself. When you're a first officer, you want to challenge yourself and press your limits and get more comfortable with doing everything, which is what she was doing to me, even though I didn't want to do it and I was crying like a big old baby. I went and did it, and it made me a better pilot. So that is the challenges of doing a crosswind landing. Crosswind takeoff, it can be a different challenge. If you don't have the crosswind correction in and are really prepared for it and really focus on making micro corrections as you're going down the runway, it can start to get really out of control. Because if you start making these S-turns as you're fighting with the wind and fighting with the rudder, all this momentum of this aircraft is having a really large shift. What can happen is the wind can get underneath your wing, essentially slamming your other wing onto the ground. I've seen it in the simulator. I've never had it in real life where somebody did that to me. I've done it to myself actually in the simulator before, where things just start to get wild and you're just fighting with the plane. You don't have control of the aircraft. and you're fighting with the plane, and then you add this component of the wind and the speed that they're going, because they were pretty far down the runway at this point. Especially a small aircraft like this, you're going to get your power up pretty quickly. And with the wind, and you're fighting that plane down the runway, it makes it harder, because the wings start to generate some lift, so it's pulling the wheels a little bit off the ground, and you'll just start to slide. It's just the reality of the situation. There have been cases where on the taxiway, completely parked, it was the middle of winter, so there was some ice on the taxiway, but a really strong wind just pushed the plane off of the taxiway into the snowbank, and it was just like, that's technically an incident. That's on their record. What can you really do? You're stuck there. You're getting a direct crosswind. You just get pushed off. It can happen, especially as your plane gets a larger rudder based off of the weight of your airplane and the rudder. Like, we're a very heavy aircraft. We can be close to 1 million pounds, but we have an enormous rudder. So that rudder is acting as a sail and can really push your plane around. So if you're not making the appropriate corrections in your wings and with your rudder, and really focus on tracking right down the middle and making those micro corrections before they get out of place, you start going left, right as you're going down the runway, you become susceptible to the momentum shift and the wind getting underneath your wing, and then you have a wing strike, or in our case, we'd have a pod strike. It's a real mess. And as you can see from these photos that I found online, there is quite a bit of swerving that's going around. And if you were to do that on the 7.4, you would essentially be in the grass. One, because of the amount of momentum that you have going on, and there have been cases like that. You have so much momentum going on that it's just not possible. If you were to crank the wheel on a 7.4 and just go all the way to the left, and then try to rip it all the way to the right while you have a crosswind, there's just too many things happening. You'll end up in the grass. And the problem is once you put a 7.4 in the grass, depending on what the situation of that ground is like, it's a very heavy plane. So you get that thing in the grass, the wheels can get stuck, and it's not like something like, oh, just hook a tug up and just yank you out. It's not like there's a towing service. It's very heavy, and it's a real process if you were to have that situation. So it doesn't really matter what type of plane you're in. You never want to be on the swerve, but as your plane gets bigger, that swerve gets more dangerous. However, I want to give these pilots credit here, because there are people that would be in this exact situation that would try to force their plane to fly, meaning they're going very quickly down the runway, things are a little bit out of control, and they want to just take their plane up flying where they're going to feel more safe. These pilots made the decision to reject, which is uncomfortable. Doing a high-speed reject is I've talked about it, a very unsafe thing, because it's not something that we do almost ever in your career. So they made the very safe decision and the smart decision of rejecting, because you can have people, and I did it in flight school before, where the plane is not in control. You're just zooming left and right down the runway. Again, in flight school, the runways are pretty big, the planes are pretty small, and they can fly a pretty slow speed. But it was just so out of control. It's like, let me just get up in the air and we'll just fix this later, right? And got up, and I was by myself and went up and flying again. These pilots made the decision like, hey, this is clearly unsafe where we're at right now. Let's stop. Let's reset and go do it again. So you got to give them credit, because there are pilots that would make bad decisions and keep making more and more bad decisions on top of the questionable decision that they did that got them into this situation. So a lot of kudos to them. Here's what ended up happening.
I just had a crash on the right side. It's not just the aircraft went squirrely and got into the grass. That's all the problem is right now. So everybody just stand by.
Leader 300 is boarded takeoff.
Leader 300, roger, we're rolling the trucks.
Leader 300, hold position there. They want to check you out. The aircraft, all the emergency vehicles off your right.
We got him in sight. Yeah, big wind gust there on the roll. Leader 300.
Affirmative, yeah, I saw you.
I thought it was really cool how the controller gave an announcement to everybody, so everybody knew what was going on. Because if you're, let's say, the Southwest guy on the other side of the airport, you're going like, what's happening? Is there a bomb threat? What's going on right now? So he's giving, hey, this is what's going on. A guy got in the grass, no big deal. So you know, okay, well, there's, as long as I'm sitting here, it's not an issue. I can hang out and fine. But you would be wondering, otherwise, what's going on? Is there a guy running around? Does somebody have a gun that's running around on the ramp? Like, you want to know what's going on. So I thought it was really cool that this controller told him what was going on. The pilots obviously are, my guess, probably going to get some additional training of what's going on, probably get some additional training for takeoffs. And for the future, my guess is that if they're ever in a situation where they have a very strong crosswind takeoff or landing, they will make a huge improvement in their judgment as far as what they're able to do and how they handle that situation. Both of these two pilots, I'm guessing there's two, are going to be replaying this situation in their heads for a while, and we'll be talking about what they could have done, even to the one that was flying and the one that was not flying, what they could have done differently to make themselves better. Most pilots tend to have that type A personality where they always want to do the absolute best that they can, or at least they should have that idea, because that is going to be what makes you continually improve. If you're just like, oh, I'm okay with absolutely average, it's going to be kind of dangerous. So even though these pilots were able to get this wing up, get the plane into the grass, and create a very unsafe situation causing an airport to be completely shut down, I have to credit them for making a very uncomfortable and safer decision of aborting that takeoff and then probably go get their jet checked out and maybe something fixed, or maybe not, and it's giving it a little time and being back on their way. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.